Okay, let's just jump right in. It's the question we all want the answer to, right? The one that fuels everything from blockbuster movies to the new global space race. When are we actually going to land on Mars? For a while there, it felt like the timeline was getting closer and closer. But you know what? The story has changed.
So let's cut right to the chase. No beating around the bush. Based on where everything stands today, we're talking global strategies, hard engineering realities, and big money. We have to split the answer in two. First, getting humans to orbit Mars. We're looking at 2033. But for the main event, for boots on the ground, well, we're now looking at a window somewhere between 2037 and 2041.
Now, if those dates feel a little further off than you were hoping for, you're not wrong. What we've seen in the last few years is something we can only call the Great Reset. And the year 2026 was really the turning point, the year when all the super optimistic predictions ran smack into a wall of reality. So what happened? Well, two huge things, really. First, NASA had to pull the plug on its massive $11 billion Mars sample return mission because the costs were just spiraling out of control. And at the same time, SpaceX, the company we all think of when we think of Mars, basically hit the pause button, pushing their Mars plans back 5 to 7 years so they could focus on the moon. I mean, those two decisions alone completely redrew the map. But this reset definitely hasn't stopped the race. Not at all. It's just changed the game. The players are shifting their strategies, and the whole geopolitical landscape is more competitive than ever. So let's take a look at who's doing what. What's so fascinating here is just how different everyone's game plan is. You've got China's space agency, CNSA, with this really aggressive, state-funded, and super clear schedule. Then you have NASA, which has pivoted to a much more cautious, step-by-step moon-to-Mars plan. And then there's SpaceX, where the timeline, let's be honest, is now being driven as much by their future IPO as it is by rocket science. And make no mistake, China is a huge driver here. They've put a stake in the ground, 2033, for their first crewed mission, which will almost certainly be an orbital flyby. And that year, it's not random. It's his perfect sweet spot where the planets are aligned for a shorter trip and the sun's activity is at a peak, which actually gives the crew a natural shield from some of the worst deep space radiation. They're playing the long game, and they're playing it smart. But for all the ambition in this global race, everybody runs into the same wall. And that wall is physics. See, the reason that landing date is pushed so far back isn't a lack of trying. It's because of what we can call the Great Filter, a set of massive, unsolved engineering problems that stand between us and ever setting foot on the red planet. It all comes down to four fundamental bottlenecks. And until we solve every single one of them, no human is safely landing on Mars. Period. Hurdle number 1, extreme radiation. The second you leave Earth's protective magnetic bubble, you're in a cosmic shooting gallery. You're getting blasted by high-energy particles. We know from our probes that a single round trip to Mars would expose an astronaut to a lifetime's worth of radiation, all in one mission. I mean, think about that. You're basically maxing out your career safety limit on your very first trip. Hurdle number 2 is entry, descent, and landing, or EDL. And this is just a brutal physics problem. Mars's atmosphere is this weird paradox. It's thick enough to create enough friction to incinerate your ship on the way down, but it's way too thin for parachutes to work on anything heavy. We've managed to land 1-ton rovers, sure, but a human mission needs to land a habitat that weighs 40 to 100 tons. It's a completely different sport. You've probably heard engineers call the robotic landing sequence the 7 minutes of terror. Well, for a human-rated system that weighs 100 times more, you can just imagine. It is an upgraded, heart-stopping nightmare of a problem that we have not yet solved. Hurdle number 3, closed-loop life support. A round trip to Mars could take 900 days. There are no resupply missions, no grocery runs. Every single drop of water, every breath of air, it all has to be recycled with almost perfect efficiency and rock-solid reliability. The systems on the space station are great, but they need constant upkeep and new supplies from Earth. That's a luxury you just don't have when you're millions of miles from home. And the final hurdle, deep space propulsion. For decades, we thought the answer was nuclear rockets. Get there faster. But in 2025, the big U.S. project, Draco, was canceled. The new thinking is that with cheap launches from companies like SpaceX, it's actually more cost-effective to just use slower chemical rockets and refuel them in orbit. The consequence of that? Longer trip times. And longer trips mean more radiation exposure and more strain on those life support systems we just talked about. So let's just recap these 4 giants. You have deadly radiation, the physics nightmare of landing, the absolute necessity of perfect life support, and the recent setback in building faster engines. Honestly, each one of these is a showstopper by itself. Solving all four is the engineering challenge of our lifetime.
So when you're faced with these huge challenges, what do? Well, a new global consensus has pretty much taken hold, the moon first reality. The logic is actually really simple. Before we attempt a 900-day marathon millions of miles away, we better prove we can survive a weekend sprint just 3 days from home.
And this quote from a NASA official just nails it. The moon is now the indispensable engineering test bed. It's the proving ground. It's where we'll test our habitats, our life support, our ability to live off the land before we bet human lives on a 9-month trip to Mars. It's just a pragmatic, risk-reduction approach. But, and this is a big but, not everyone agrees. Robert Zubrin, who's a huge Mars advocate, has a powerful counterargument. He basically sees the moon as a strategic dead end, a trap. Why? Because the moon doesn't have the key ingredients you need to be self-sufficient, like carbon and nitrogen. Mars, on the other hand, has all of it. He argues that delaying Mars for the moon is a huge strategic mistake. And beyond the strategy, you have to follow the money. Why did SpaceX pivot so hard to the moon? Well, it has a lot to do with its anticipated IPO, which is valued at an astronomical figure. And to justify that kind of number to investors, they need real short-term profits. Fulfilling big, lucrative NASA moon contracts, that's a solid business plan. Funding a multi-trillion-dollar Mars colony that's decades away? Not so much. So where does all this leave us? It might feel like a big delay, but what's really happening is a shift. We're moving away from a kind of frantic, Cold War-style space race to something more deliberate, more sustainable, and ultimately probably more achievable. And that brings us right back to where we started. This new, more pragmatic approach is what really solidifies our timeline. So yeah, the first humans to see Mars up close will likely do it from orbit around 2033. But the first to actually leave footprints in that red dust, they're going to have to wait until the tech is truly ready, putting that historic moment somewhere between 2037 and 2041. At the end of the day, the biggest takeaway is this. The moon isn't just a destination anymore. It's a process. It's the forge. It's the crucible where we are going to hammer out the technology and the strategies that will either make or break our future as a spacefaring species. It's not a detour from Mars. It's now the only viable path to get there. And this leaves us with one final fascinating thought. This new race to Mars has become more complex, more competitive, and yeah, more deliberate than ever before. So the question isn't just when we will get there anymore, but how will this new, multi-layered approach to space exploration ultimately shape our future as a species that lives on more than one world?